I didn't realize I was dating a narcissist until it was too late. I met this guy when I was 20. Let's call him Zack, from my girlfriend. Her boyfriend at the time's cousin came to this gathering me, and her put together. Fast forward, a couple months later we started dating. Everything was good, but he became toxic after we started getting serious. Around 6 months into dating, he was jealous, being controlling, and he would tell me that no one could ever love me like he does, and I should be grateful I have him. It was mostly mental abuse during the early stages. Fast forward, when I was freshly 23, I found out I was pregnant with my daughter and he was not happy about it. We got into a huge argument about it and he even told me I should consider abortion. I told him he was crazy to even think of doing that. It was totally unexpected, but I knew I wanted to keep my baby as soon as I found out. That argument was the first time he ever did something physical. He did not hit me, but he threw a cup at the wall only about a foot away from me. I didn't know what to expect of him now that he was throwing things at me, so it was always like I was walking on eggshells around him. After a little bit, he got used to the odds of having a baby, but the problem was when we found out the gender. He threw a fit saying girls are useless, and they don't do anything but complain. That's the first time he put his hands on me. He slapped me across the face when I screamed at him, telling him if he can't accept the baby no matter what she is, then he shouldn't be a father. When he slapped me across the face, it was like a reality check. My father unfortunately abused my mom during my childhood, and when he slapped me, it was like a instant flashback to my childhood. My pregnancy was pretty normal. Nothing really out of the ordinary. It getting closer to my little girl being born while me and his 4th anniversary is approaching as well. The delivery was actually quite nice. He was supportive, and for a second I thought my daughter would help us heal our relationship. It was hell the first 5 months. She wouldn't sleep and I had quit my part-time job, so I was the one taking care of her. Zack had a successful job that was providing for us, but I did have a part-time job so we could afford some more luxuries and not just the basics. The abuse just kept getting worse and worse over time, and he became physical more often until every time we would argue, he would put his hands on me. Each time I would always think hard about our relationship, and if I should get out. ATP has manipulated me to thinking I was nothing without him and never will be. This is when family and friends started to notice, and I basically isolated myself from everyone we know. Once my daughter started getting older, and now was starting to speak and get into that toddler stage, I knew that she would start remembering it, and I used to cry in the shower about that. I was in a dark place. I had no family or friends. I was struggling as a mom, and if I did decide I wanted to leave, I would have to start working again, and it was a hassle. I think my last straw was this one day where 2 sets of things happened. My daughter had a play date over, and I noticed she was aggressive and even hit her friend for taking her crayon. The kid was fine, and the parent was only pissed off. Later that evening, I asked my daughter why did she do that to her friend, and she told me I saw Daddy do it to you. That was the most heartbreaking thing I've heard, especially as a mother. That night, I had a dream that my daughter was a teen around 10 years later, and Zack would do the same thing to my daughter as to me. That day was about 1.5 years ago. Once I got approved for apartment, I packed very few things and stayed in a hotel until I could move in. Me and my daughter are now living in an apartment 35 minutes from my ex, and I got full custody. Us women need to look out for each other, and if you see someone in an abusive relationship, speak up.
I left my abusive relationship of 4 years, 7 months ago now. He was mainly an emotional and mental abuser. He constantly threatened to hit and murder me. He always said it in a joking manner, but deep down I could tell it wasn't a joke. In March of last year, we got into a huge fight over groceries and he threw something at me. Then he got in my face and said he was going to hit me. As stupid as it sounds, I told him to do it. I remember his fists clenching out of the corner of my eye, but he didn't follow through with it. This was when I realized I was in an abusive relationship. A few days later, I told him to go to therapy or move out because I was worried he was going to become physical. I know now him throwing something at me is physical abuse. He chose therapy and things were honestly better for a few months. We even looked at rings and I tried a few on. Then in November of last year, he got mad at me and put his hand around my throat. It was like a light went off in his eyes. I have never seen someone go black. Looking back, I'm lucky he snapped out of it. After he said his intimidation and controlling dialogue, he removed his hand and said he shouldn't have done that. He didn't apologize until later that week. I knew it was time to leave because it was only going to get worse. I told him to find somewhere to live and was nice about it until he left. He moved out about 6 weeks later. Now we're no contact. The first few months after I was dissociating badly, nothing felt real, and I was living in a heavy fog. I had a couple nightmares of him. I felt exhausted but also energized. My body was adjusting to not being in a constant state of fight or flight. My skin finally started to heal, and slowly I started sleeping better. I know I'm one of the lucky ones. I got out before it was extreme. Now that it's been almost 5 months of no contact, I finally am starting to feel like myself again. I can sleep through most nights without waking up or having nightmares. My face is almost completely cleared. I wish there was more education on emotional and mental abuse. I always told myself if a man ever put his hands on me, I would leave. And I did. But I wish I would have known to set boundaries when it came to the manipulation, gaslighting, controlling, and degrading behaviors. The abuse began slow and creeped into a monster. You don't even realize what's happening until you're in the trenches of it. Friends, family tried to tell me, but I wouldn't listen. I know some of the wounds I have are so deep they'll take years to heal. I still don't believe I'm fully deserving of a healthy love. I still don't believe I'm as great of a person as I am. Being consistently belittled and brought down does something to your psyche. This has been the most difficult thing to heal because it's become so ingrained. I believe if I would have stayed, I eventually would have been hurt badly or killed. I tried leaving multiple times but was never strong enough because it wasn't a black eye, or he wasn't hitting me so it could always be worse, or I believed his apologies and promises for change. That is the worst mindset, and I wish I could tell every person to never excuse someone's behavior. The worst part of it all is, even after all the trauma, I still want the best for him. I still find ways to blame myself. I still question if the abuse was that bad. I feel like I'm doing well, but I also think it's because my brain has blocked out so much of the bad that I'm unable to think about how much I was drowning at the time. So many women in my family, including my mom, have been or are in abusive relationships. I'm thankful I broke the cycle.
Last straw. He did several things what breached my trust, many of them involving other women. Instead of apologizing and making things better, he would either miss the point on purpose or he would change the subject on purpose. End of the background story. There was this evening when he was looking at something on his phone while I was tying my shoe. I, out of curiosity, asked him what he was looking at, but instead of showing me like a normal person, he slightly raised his voice and radically refused to show me. How the conversation continued. Me. Well, if you keep acting like this, you should not wonder that I no longer trust you, keeping in mind that you made several other mistakes which made me stop trusting you.
Next. Well, me meet often enough. We are never bored together. There is always some form of spontaneity. So why would I cheat on you?
Me. Regarding this situation, this might rather be something you would want to ask your own self.
Next. This building is really beautiful. What do you think?
Me. You know what? Your little manipulative tactic is no longer working on me.
Next. Doesn't say any word. Just leaves me standing and goes home.
I then tried to communicate through text what happened. He kept leaving me on read. I then told him that if he keeps doing so, I will break up with him. Didn't care. Left that one message on read too. First text from him comes next morning to ask me if I would attend the lesson we have together. Instead of answering him the question, I broke up with him. How I am doing? I am extremely relieved that I am no longer dating him. I had a short phase when I would enjoy attention from other dudes to the core, but now I am fully focused on myself and my own development. I still have flashbacks about the negative moments, but I can't remember any good one. It's like the few good times deleted themselves out of my head. I am on my journey to tap into my feminine energy, hyper aware of my surroundings, because we attend the same university, and the odds of him stalking me are above zero. Every time I see him, I internally make fun of him. I do lots of research on narcissism, sociopathy, and toxic relationships. How long it has been since I left him? Beautiful 4 months.
It was 3 years of constant sexual and physical abuse, and I've been out of it for exactly 3 years, and I'm happy to say I'm in a very loving, healthy, supportive relationship with the most amazing and kind man on the planet. Slad nearly 3 years together, and he's never raised his voice or shown a hint of anger. He's phenomenal, truly. The final straw with my ex for me was him beating my beloved cat, Peeps. He grabbed her by the neck and slammed her on the ground repeatedly while I screamed and begged him to stop. Me standing up for myself for the first time, telling him that he would not be in my life anymore, was the first in a chain of events over the next 48 hours that would lead to me nearly being beaten to death on multiple occasions, viciously sexually assaulted, and concussed, but also me finally getting help and getting him arrested. It was messy, traumatic, and I still haven't recovered fully, but it was the end. I'm thrilled to say Peeps is fine now, albeit afraid of men. Other than my partner, who is her favorite human in existence, I don't regret standing up for myself, although I do realize how lucky I am to still be here. Things could have ended so much worse. He did stalk me and my boyfriend for over a year, and would show up to our house in the middle of the night, despite restraining orders. But after multiple unrelated arrests and us moving cities, he ceased.
It honestly wasn't even the abuse that made me realize. It had been escalating for quite some time. But truly, the moment I realized what we had was no longer love was the moment I answered his call, and he just said, "You react to my voice as if it were poison." I got off the phone and called a work friend, not even a close friend of mine, and I asked her to come over and help me think it through. I don't know why I called her, even still to this day, but she came right over and was so wonderful and helpful. That moment was 5 years and 3 days ago, and it was the greatest moment of my life. It took 5 months to get out safely, and I am so grateful that I did. The last night I saw him, he smashed my phone, beat me, and tried to strangle me. It was a miracle he stopped when he did. The last moment I saw his face was as I was throwing the rest of his belongings out the window as he waited for his cab. My life has gotten so much better. I met the love of my life since then, who treats me with love, kindness, and patience. I have also started my own freelance business that has been quite successful so far. I have a wonderful, loving network of friends. Life has truly opened up for me, and I relish waking up and getting out of bed every day. It gets so much better.
For me, it was a slow build until the final straw. Once I noticed that I wasn't being treated fairly, my mentality started to change, and I moved towards closing myself off and leaving the relationship. My ego was what kept me in. I wanted to be the one that was important enough to change him. We were together 1 years, and it has been 5 years since. I still notice patterns that affect me today. At the time, I thought I would be stronger for it, because I felt so disciplined and selfless. But those effects wore off, and the internalized self-hate and shame lasted. I thought I was above all that, because in the moment of him blaming me or calling me names, I knew it wasn't true, so I thought it wouldn't get to me. But I'm human, it got to me.
I left 8 months ago, and still have nightmares about it sometimes. We were together for 10 years, and he mentally and emotionally abused me the whole time, and would love bomb me into staying anytime I tried to leave. I struggled with anxiety and panic attacks that he always would accuse me of lying about for attention. The last bad fight we had, he backed me into the closet, and I started having a panic attack and begged him to leave me alone while crying my eyes out, but instead he grabbed my wrists and slammed me into the back of the closet, screaming in my face to stop doing this, stop acting like this, it's not real. He had never been physical with me before, but had punched walls in multiple houses in the past. I knew staying at that point meant the physical abuse would only get worse and worse, and I had to leave. I stonewalled him for a few days while he tried to love bomb me again, until I finally told him I was done for good, packed everything I could into 3 suitcases and left that same day, drove overnight 2 states away to my sister's house that he didn't know the location of, and never looked back. It's been a tough road. 8 months later, I'm still healing, but I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life.
He had told me that I was lucky he wasn't bashing my head against this wall as I was crawling on the ground, crying my eyes out, cleaning up the mess he made, from knocking everything out of the fridge while he was in a drunken state, blaming me for the mess. And it all started because he had forgotten he was done telling a story. And I walked away to the laundry room 5 feet. After my entire shift, he was berating me, texting me over 40 times, asking what laundry was clean or dirty, taking pictures of each item of clothing that were his. It's been over 2.5 years, and I've been in a relationship with the most amazing individual I've ever met. He is sweet, funny, kind, patient, intelligent. He listens, cares what I have to say, works as a team, and just is what I've always dreamed what your partner should be. And so much more. There's so much possibilities out there when you're not being taken advantage of. Good job to you all, seeing your potential and getting out of such a dangerous situation for all sides.
My story isn't anywhere near as bad as anyone else's. My ex was emotionally abusive, very hot and cold, and would get angry at me over the most bizarre things. Once he got angry because he'd asked me why the washing machine was on a different setting than the one I'd instructed him, at his behest, to use it on. I tried to explain that I just knocked it by accident with my hip when cooking often, but he kept yelling at me to stop saying no and wouldn't let me explain. Anyway, after he had used me for over a year for money and somewhere to live, and beat me down emotionally so that I had no self-esteem, and pretended that he loved me when actually he was just biding his time to get his old job back, that he'd been fired from, and admitted that he actually had a secret 9-year-old daughter that he'd never told me about. There was one incident that broke me. We were out for a walk to a place that he'd been to once and I'd been to only a couple of times. I asked him which way to go to walk by the river. He said one direction and I just wanted to check the direction on my map on my phone. I have no sense of direction and just wanted to orient myself. And he got angry because I was patronizing him. All I'd said was, "Let me just check." I began to have a panic attack in the street because I couldn't deal with it happening again, him being angry with me for something so small, and he just stood there angrily ignoring me, clenching his jaw. I was crouched down on the pavement, unable to breathe and crying, and he only cared about his hurt feelings. He then walked off and left me in the street. We argued about it later, and he couldn't accept that I wasn't patronizing him. From then on, I'd mentally checked out. I was so broken from it. He'd given me herpes after lying that he was clean. He definitely knew he had it. He used to just ignore me when we were out of the house together, like full-on facing away from me, clenching his jaw and staring rigidly ahead when I tried to just have a conversation with me, even walk 3 feet ahead of me. He lied all the time and would be so on and off that I never knew where I stood. Looking back now, the fact that he told me his ex was abusive, and they'd had their daughter taken off them by social services due to it, but somehow he was only allowed supervised contact in a contact center once a month, and he cut contact with her. When he decided she didn't like him enough, should have been a huge red flag. A couple of weeks after I'd had the panic attack, he told me once again that he was leaving, and rather than begging him to stay, I just asked him when he was leaving. I then sat there and told him every way he'd made me feel like shit. And he even agreed that the times I'd said I felt he didn't even like me, he actually didn't at times. He apologized and even tried to stay for way longer than he'd said he had, but I'd had enough and told him to get out. I'm still a long way from being over it, and I don't know if I can trust men again. Being with someone who doesn't even want to be with you but pretends they do because it's convenient nearly destroyed me. I still find it hard to believe that anyone would really want to be with me, and it feels like he stole that hope from me.
We were together for 15 years. I left him in the middle of the night with our son in December of 2020. He was emotionally, mentally, and occasionally physically abusive. Never to our child, but to me. I tried so hard, I pleaded with him and stayed for so long, endlessly killing myself for his approval and for him to stop hurting me. He drove drunk with our son, and that's when I knew it was done. He endangered my baby boy, and I didn't realize my power until he did that. Took my son in the middle of the night, acquired a civil and criminal restraining order. Over 50 hours of abusive audio recordings I secretly documented and uploaded to an email, including an audio recording of him admitting to drinking and driving with our child. A note from my son's pediatrician stating that I told her about the abuse. Domestic violence leave of absence at 2 separate jobs within 2 different years. Needless to say, not only did I take my power back, I took all of it. He couldn't see his son for 4 months, and I made damn sure that he was held accountable. I didn't have family when I left. I moved into a DV shelter. I moved out of the shelter in October. I moved into my own 2-bedroom apartment with my son. I'm a part-time college student and I work full-time. I've been single this whole time. I'm in therapy for my CPTSD and high anxiety. I get hit on all the time and I've had men try to initiate something with me. I just can't trust them. I love being alone.
Like, subscribe, and leave a comment. There will be a lot more cool content and you will help me a lot.